For 8 years, I paid my parents' rent, covered my dad's medical bills, and financed every failure my brother called a dream. I kept their lights on, their fridge full, their lives running. And the one day my daughter spent 4 months carving a gift for her uncle, he threw it straight into her face in front of our whole family. That was the moment I realized I wasn't their daughter anymore, I was their ATM. What I did next ripped the entire family apart and saved our lives. My name is Ophelia Knox, and for 8 years I was the quiet backbone holding up 3 adults who never once wondered if I was tired. I live in Seattle's small apartment, 5th floor, thin balcony with a view of clouds that never pick a mood. I work as a senior software engineer, a job people like to imagine comes with peace, comfort, and plenty of breathing room. What they don't see is how fast your stability disappears when you're financing not just your own life, not just your child's life, but your entire family's. My daughter, Elliot, is the only person I've ever carried willingly. She's 12, gentle, creative, the kind of kid who picks up a piece of scrap wood and somehow sees a treasure inside it. I've spent her whole life trying to protect that innocence. But protecting her from my parents and my younger brother Mason, that battle was long, draining, and one I didn't even realize I was fighting until it was too late. My parents, Ronald and Joanne, live in Tucson and have relied on me for nearly a decade of rent, medications, overdue bills, emergency grocery runs, everything. They would always say, "You're such a blessing, Ophelia." Like those words were supposed to make the financial bleeding feel lighter. They never asked how I was doing, only when the next payment was coming. And then there's Mason, my brother, a walking storm of million-dollar ideas. Every few months he reinvented himself. A food truck owner, a gym trainer, an art curator, a crypto advisor. Each dream lasted just long enough for me to help stabilize it before it collapsed again. The dream that trapped me the hardest was Sunridge Clay Loftus Pottery Studio. He showed up at my place one afternoon with a binder full of color charts, business projections, logo samples. For a moment, I saw something hopeful in him, something worth rooting for. He said he needed a $72,000 loan, and collateral my BMW launched the studio properly. Against every instinct screaming, "No," I signed. Mason left the bank that day, blasting music, windows down, like he was finally someone he could be proud of. For a short time, it looked real. He sent me photos of freshly glazed mugs, tourists posing by his storefront, shelves full of bright ceramic pieces. But behind those curated snapshots, the truth was slipping. Late payments, excuses, vague answers, stories that changed each time I asked for clarity. Meanwhile, Elliot was quietly carving a wooden gift box for Mason's birthday, her first major woodworking project. 4 months of work. She lined it with velvet, sanded the corners smooth, carved his name into the top, and bought tiny brass hinges with her allowance. "Do you think Uncle Mason will like it?" she asked. "I think he'll love it," I told her. I didn't want to admit I was hoping as hard as she was. I didn't know that his birthday party would become the moment everything snapped. The moment I'd finally stop carrying people who only knew how to take. If any part of this already feels familiar, hit like and comment, I understand. And if you want to follow the rest of this journey, make sure to subscribe. Your support genuinely keeps this channel going. It means more to me than you know. Thank you for being here and helping me tell these stories. The evening of Mason's birthday felt strangely heavy from the moment Elliot and I got into the car. She held the wooden box on her lap like it was something alive, something fragile she needed to protect. Every few minutes she'd run her fingers over the carved letters of his name, double-check the hinges, lift the lid to make sure the velvet lining hadn't shifted. She was nervous in that hopeful way only a child can be, believing that effort and love are always enough to earn kindness in return. When we pulled up to my parents' house in Tucson, the place was overflowing. Cars lined the street, loud music shook the windows, and chili pepper string lights flickered around the carport like it was a block party instead of a birthday. Mason always liked making himself the center of attention. Tonight, he was glowing in it. He stood near the folding tables crowded with tamales, beer cans, and people I barely recognized, neighbors. Old classmates, random friends from his revolving list of hobbies. He wore a new linen shirt that I was almost certain he hadn't bought with his own money. He was mid-laugh, drink in hand, surrounded by people egging him on like he was some kind of local celebrity. Elliot tightened her grip on the box. "Should I go now?" "Whenever you're ready," I said. She took a breath and walked toward him. The crowd parted a little, like they sensed something small and pure approaching something careless. "Happy birthday, Uncle Mason," she said, holding the box out to him. He barely looked at her. "What's that? A gift? I made it." He flipped the lid open and stared inside. There was nothing in the box. It was meant to be used however he wanted. Elliot had imagined he might keep his watches in it. "You made this," he said, loud enough for people around him to hear. "Yes," she answered softly. He snorted. Actually snorted. "Handmade junk. Seriously, Ellie?" Before I could move, before Elliot could blink, he tossed the box straight at her like it was garbage he was clearing off a table. The wooden corner struck her cheek with a sharp crack. The lid snapped off as it hit the ground, skidding across the concrete. Elliot staggered backward, her hand flying to her face. I saw her eyes shimmer with hurt, deep, stunned, disbelieving hurt. The entire backyard froze for a breath. Then my father chuckled under his breath, as if she were overreacting. My mother shook her head and muttered, "Kids these days." A few of Mason's friends laughed awkwardly, the kind of laugh people make when they see cruelty and don't know how to process it. I felt something inside me shift, not break, not crumble, but lock into place. A cold clarity, a quiet, burning finality. I walked to Elliot, touched her chin gently, checked her cheek. The skin was scraped where the brass hinge caught her, a thin line of blood beginning to form. She didn't cry. She just looked at me with this fragile question in her eyes. Why? I picked up the broken pieces of her gift. The months of her effort split apart in a second. Then I looked at Mason, already turning away, already laughing with someone else as if nothing meaningful had happened. And in that moment, every blind spot I had left for my family disappeared. This was no longer about overdue bills, or loans, or obligations. This was about my daughter. And no one, especially not Mason, got to hurt her and walk away untouched. What I did next wasn't loud or dramatic. It was simple, quiet, and irreversible. The beginning of the end. I drove home with one hand on the wheel and the other resting lightly on Elliot's knee. She stared out the window, cradling her cheek, trying to pretend it didn't hurt. The passing Tucson streetlights flickered across her face, catching the tiny cut left by the brass hinge. I could feel her trying to swallow the lump in her throat. She wasn't crying not because it didn't hurt, but because she didn't want to make it harder on me. When we stepped inside our apartment, she went straight to the bathroom, cleaned the scrape, and pressed a bandage over it with the quiet precision of a child who has learned not to complain. Then she placed the broken wooden box on her desk like something she still hoped she could fix. I watched her gently fit the pieces together, trying to make sense of what Mason had done. I wanted to sit beside her. I wanted to wrap her up and tell her none of it was her fault. But there was something else I needed to do, first something I'd avoided for nearly a decade. I sat on the couch, opened my laptop, and pulled up my bank dashboard. Every month, for years, a list of automatic payments drained from my account, like clockwork. My parents' rent, their utilities, my father's prescriptions, Mason's studio overages, loan fees. The endless stream of unexpected emergencies only I ever paid for. My cursor hovered over a small toggle next to each line. Autopay, on. A tiny switch, but a massive truth. For 8 years, I had been the one person keeping their lives stitched together. They never noticed the sewing. Only when the thread got pulled too tight. I clicked the first toggle. Off. Another. Off. Then another. Off. 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 It was like shutting down a life support machine only. It wasn't mine. It was theirs. My phone buzzed before I even closed the laptop. "Mason, we need to talk." Then, "You're acting crazy." Then, "You're ruining my life." It escalated fast, each message more frantic, more accusatory, more unhinged. I didn't respond. A few minutes later, my parents started texting. My mother demanded explanations in all caps. My father guilt-tripped me with lines about his medications, even though he'd never once remembered to ask how Elliot or I were doing. Not a single message mentioned her injury, not one word about the bruise forming on her cheek. I stared at their messages, feeling nothing. Nothing but a strange, clean quietness. Because for the first time in my life, I understood something painfully simple. They hadn't needed me. They had depended on me. Two very different things. Later that night, I peeked into Elliot's room. She was sitting at her desk, slowly sanding the broken edges of her box, the soft rasp of the sandpaper echoing through her tiny room. She didn't look up when she said, "Mom, why would he do that?" I sat on the edge of her bed. "Because some people don't know how to value what's made with love." She nodded, not fully understanding, but accepting the answer for now. As she worked, I realized something important. Breaking free from my family wasn't just for me, it was for her. So she'd never grow up thinking love had to be painful or one-sided. By midnight, my phone was full of missed calls and voicemails from Mason cycling, from anger to pleading to threats to apologies and back again. I deleted them all without listening. The shift had already happened. And there was no going back. 2 mornings after I turned off every autopay, the fallout began. I was pouring cereal for Elliot when my email pinged with a message from Lane Foster, the loan manager, who handled Mason's paperwork. The subject line read, "Notice of default, immediate action required." My stomach tightened, but not out of fear. More like anticipation. A storm I'd seen coming for years was finally arriving, and I wasn't the one standing in its path anymore. By 10 a.m., the repo truck rolled up to Mason's pottery studio. Lane sent me the live feed link, something he always did when collateral was being seized. I tapped it open while sitting on my couch, coffee still steaming in my hand. The camera showed the sidewalk in front of Sunridge Clay Loft. Mason was already outside, pacing hard, phone pressed to his ear like he could scream the situation away. When the flatbed truck turned the corner, he froze. The driver stepped out, clipboard in hand, and Mason launched into a frantic ramble blaming the bank, blaming supply delays, blaming me, especially me. "She blindsided me," he shouted. "She owes me time. This is her fault." The repo guys didn't care. They'd seen it all before. In less than 3 minutes, they hooked the BMW to the lift. Mason lunged toward the driver's door like he was going to rip it off. One of the repo guys calmly stepped between them, hand raised, unfazed by the yelling. The car lifted off the pavement inch by inch. A crowd formed, tourists, neighbors, people passing by on lunch break. Phones came out. Videos started rolling. I watched from my couch as Mason's face went from red to pale to something desperate and empty. When the BMW rolled away on the flatbed, he chased it down the block, yelling into the wind as if the universe might reverse itself just to comfort him. It didn't. By afternoon, the car was listed for auction. By evening, the studio's power was cut for non-payment. 2 days later, the landlord taped a bright orange notice on the door. 3-day pay or quit. When Mason couldn't pay, the lock changed. He showed up with a duffel bag and kicked the door once before walking away. No plan, no ride, no backup, no one left to call, except me. And I didn't answer. That week, he called 27 times. Messages flipped wildly rage, sobbing, begging, bargaining, threats, promises. But the moment he threw Elliot's gift at her face, the last thread between us snapped. Everything else was simply consequences arriving on their own timelines. I didn't celebrate his downfall. But I also didn't rescue him from it. Not this time. And if you've ever watched someone who mistreated you finally face the reality they created, you know exactly how heavy and strangely freeing it feels. If you're still here with me, tap like to support the story so others can find it. Drop a comment saying, "Right timing," if you believe in consequences catching up. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I'd love to have you join this journey. Your support truly fuels this channel. Thank you for being here. Desperation doesn't just make people reckless, it makes them dangerous. And the moment Mason realized I wasn't coming to save him, his panic curdled into something meaner, something that reached across state lines and slammed right into my life. 3 weeks after his studio shut down, I got a Slack message from our HR team. "Ophelia, we need you downstairs." My stomach tightened. I rode the elevator down, half expecting a work emergency. Instead, through the glass of the lobby doors, I saw two figures standing at the employee exit me parents, Ronald and Joanne. My mother was holding a cardboard sign that read, "Ungrateful daughter," the letters thick and uneven like she'd drawn them in a hurry. My dad leaned on his cane, jaw set in the stubborn line I knew too well. Employees walked past them, confused, whispering. My parents waved the sign at anyone who made eye contact, like they were protesting an injustice instead of the consequences of their own decisions. Security approached them, calm but firm. "Sir, ma'am, you can't stand here. This is private property." My father scoffed. "She's our kid. We can stand wherever we want." "No, you can't," the guard said. "You've been asked to leave," they argued. They tried to force the guards into a debate about family obligations, about how I was abandoning them. But the guards didn't play that game. They escorted my parents off the property, issued a trespass warning, and filed a report with HR. I didn't go outside. I just stood behind the tinted glass, watching two people who raised me display their hurt pride to a crowd of strangers like it was entertainment. That night, my mother left me a voicemail I didn't listen to, and my father sent me a text. "You'll regret this." I deleted it, but the worst was still coming. 5 days after the workplace incident, at 1 in the morning, someone started pounding on my apartment door. The hits were loud, too loud for a hallway that quiet. Elliot bolted upright in her bed and ran to my room, shaking. I told her to hide in the closet and lock the door. Then I walked to the peephole. Mason. He was swaying, drunk, eyes glassy, face blotched red. He slammed his fist against the door again. "Open up, Ophelia!" His voice cracked into something wild. "You ruined my life." He kicked the bottom of the door so hard the frame rattled. I took a small step back, heart pounding. Through the peephole, I saw him lean his forehead against the door, breathing hard, muttering curses I couldn't make out. I dialed 911 with one hand, whispering to the operator, "My brother is trying to force his way into my apartment. He's intoxicated. My daughter is here." Within minutes, 2 officers appeared at the end of the hallway. Mason turned when he heard them, stumbling into a string of slurred excuses that made no sense. When they tried to handcuff him, he resisted a weak, wavering kind of resistance, but enough to add charges. They hauled him away, still yelling my name like I owed him something. The next morning, I filed for a restraining order. The judge approved it immediately. No contact, 200 yards distance, state enforceable. For the next 30 nights, Elliot slept with her bedside lamp on. Sometimes I'd find her sitting awake, eyes on the door, listening for footsteps that never came. 3 weeks later, my parents were evicted from the house I had paid for all those years. They packed what they could into their beat-up Corolla and moved into a cheap motel on the edge of town. Their social media posts were dramatic and vague, calling me heartless and lost, but never mentioning the real truth. I waited to feel guilty, but what I felt was relief. A strange, quiet relief that hummed beneath my ribs like a new heartbeat. And for the first time, I let myself believe that just may, I was finally free from all of them. After the restraining order was approved, I upgraded everything in our apartment. New deadbolt, reinforced strike plate, smart locks with access logs, additional cameras covering every angle of the hallway. It wasn't paranoia, it was protection. Elliot helped me install each piece, holding screws between her fingers like they were precious. When I drilled the final plate into the frame, she asked quietly, "Does this mean we're safe now?" I didn't lie. It means we're safer than before. The first week after Mason's arrest, Elliot struggled to sleep. She kept her lamp on, the soft yellow glow spilling onto the hallway. Some nights I'd hear her pacing her room, checking the windows, making sure the door was locked. Trauma shrinks a child's world, and for a while, hers had shrunk to the size of our apartment walls. But healing sometimes comes in unexpected ways. One afternoon, I found her in the living room with the broken wooden box Mason's gift she'd spent months making before he threw it at her face. She had spread the pieces out on a towel and was examining them with a focus I'd never seen. "You're fixing it?" I asked. She shook her head. "No, I'm making something new." And she did. For weeks, she carved, sanded, shaped. Not a repair, but a reinvention. A stronger design, sharper corners, cleaner joints. Watching her rebuild from the ruins of what he destroyed taught me something powerful. Strength doesn't always roar. Sometimes it sits quietly at a desk with sandpaper and a vision. At work, I poured myself into a new back-end project that had been stuck for months. My manager noticed. 2 months later, I was promoted to lead software engineer, given stock options, and allowed to set my own hours. For the first time since becoming a mother, I wasn't working from a place of survival, I was working from a place of control. 3 months after the promotion, I bought a house. A real house. It wasn't huge, but it was ours. A quiet neighborhood north of Seattle, lined with cedar trees tall enough to mute the noise of the world. Elliot got her own workshop in the garage, and the smell of sawdust became part of our daily life. We changed our phone numbers, our emails, our forwarding addresses 7, our vet records for the cat. Every loose thread that tied us to my family was gently cut, one by one, until nothing remained for them to pull. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peaceful. The kind of peace you don't realize you've been starving for until you finally taste it. Elliot started sleeping through the night again, her lamp finally switching off at bedtime. She smiled more, laughed more, built more. I began to breathe easier too. For the first time in a decade, it wasn't that life became perfect, it just became ours. And that, after everything, was more than enough. Almost a full year passed before their shadows crossed into my life again. By then, the chaos had quieted. Our routines were steady. Elliot was thriving in school, joining the woodworking club, entering small community contests. I was leading a team at work, building a life that finally felt like it belonged to us. Then one afternoon, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A physical, letter-shaky blue handwriting, envelope smudged like it had been held too long by nervous hands. There was no return address, but I knew immediately who it was from. I opened it slowly, half expecting anger or blame. But inside were 3 pages torn from a yellow legal pad, the handwriting uneven, desperate. "Sis, I was wrong," it began. Mason went on to list every mistake he'd made, how losing the BMW destroyed his credit, how the studio shutting down left him couch surfing and broke, how our parents were bouncing between motels. He wrote that our father's diabetes had gotten worse, and they needed help paying for a specialist. He asked for forgiveness. He asked for money. He asked for one last chance. I stood in the kitchen reading it. The window opened just enough to let in the smell of cedar from our backyard. It felt surreal, like the past was knocking on the wrong door, trying to squeeze into a life that no longer had space for it. Elliot walked in, pouring cereal into a bowl. She noticed the papers in my hand and paused. "Is that from them?" "Yes," I said. She hesitated. "Are you going to help?" That was the moment. The one that mattered. The one that defined everything I had learned the hard way. I folded the pages neatly, slid them back into the envelope, and dropped it straight into the trash. "No," I said. "I'm not." She nodded, slow and not relieved, not upset, just understanding. She'd learned more in the past year about boundaries than most adults learn in a lifetime. Later that afternoon, I grabbed a blank postcard from my desk. No picture, just white. I wrote 5 words in clean, even letters. "We are no longer family." No signature, no return address, no explanation. I mailed it from the blue box on the corner. It was the last thread thin, frayed, but still there that needed to be cut. And once the postcard slipped out of my hand, it was gone for good. I never heard back. No letter, no call, nothing. My parents eventually slipped off the radar too, surviving on food stamps and charity clinics, bouncing between cheap motels and borrowed couches. Mason, according to distant cousins, was delivering food in a beat-up Civic that barely made it through a full shift. I didn't hate them. I didn't wish them harm, but I also didn't save them. Some endings don't look like explosions or final fights. Some endings look like silence, the kind that settles in after a storm and lets you breathe without fear, guilt, or obligation. By the time winter rolled in, with the first snow dusting our cedar trees, I realized something. Their absence wasn't a loss, it was a beginning. A full year after cutting ties, peace didn't arrive in a dramatic wave. It came quietly, like sunlight slipping through blinds on a morning you're finally allowed to sleep in. Our new life didn't feel glamorous, or triumphant, it felt steady. And for someone who spent years living on emotional quicksand, steady was everything. Elliot had grown into her confidence like it was finally the right size. She spent hours in her garage workshop, carving, sanding, staining. The smell of fresh-cut wood drifted into the house like a permanent reminder that something beautiful was being built. Here, not just furniture, but a childhood she actually felt safe in. One of her new HouseUSA cedar piece with dovetail joints and a sliding hidden compartment won second place at the county fair. When they tied the blue ribbon to it, Elliot's smile stretched wider than I'd ever seen. She wasn't smiling because she won. She was smiling because she'd learned she didn't need anyone's approval to create something meaningful. As for me, I settled deeper into my role as lead software engineer. I set my own hours, mentored new hires, built systems that made me proud. For the first time, work didn't feel like a lifeline. I was clinging to it, felt like a platform I was building from. My home felt like mine. My time felt like mine. My life felt like mine. Every now and then, through distant relatives or small-town gossip, I'd hear pieces of my family's story. My parents drifting between motels, living off disability checks and food stamps. Mason delivering food in a beat-up Civic, sometimes sleeping inside it. I didn't feel vindicated. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt distance, the kind that comes when you finally understand some doors aren't meant to be reopened. One Saturday, Elliot and I hiked along a trail in the Cascades. The sun was warm, but the breeze was cool, carrying the scent of pine and mountain dust. About halfway up, she asked, "Mom, do you ever miss them?" I thought about the broken wooden box, the pounding on my door at 1 a.m., the cardboard sign outside my workplace, the years of being the only adult in a family full of grown children. And then I thought about this moment, this quiet trail, this peace, this daughter who trusted me completely. I took a breath. "I miss who I thought they could be," I said, "but not who they were." She nodded, then took my hand, and we kept walking. The trail curved upward, and the view opened into a stretch of mountains glowing gold in the late afternoon sun. For the first time in years, I felt light, because peace isn't loud. Peace doesn't demand attention. Peace is consistency, safety, boundaries, and the courage to walk away when staying would destroy you. And I had finally chosen peace. If this ending touched something in you, please hit the like button. It helps this story find people who need it. Leave a comment sharing what part resonated with you most. I read every single one. And if you'd like more stories like this, consider subscribing. Your support truly empowers me to keep creating. Thank you for being here, for listening, and for helping this channel grow.